thousands and thousands. I went on, I'm going to have to do something different on the X, on the Twitter, because all the it streams over on the Twitter. Every video on there it took down. I don't know what's going on with that. Yeah. I haven't said nothing derogatory. You just a Facebooker? Yeah. 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 All right. Well, I don't have as many pages today, but we're still in this chapter 5. So this is Amos part 10. I'm calling this God Makes a Difference. See, you can argue all kinds of points with this because, immediately when I think of this, well, God's no respecter of person. God didn't make any difference. Well, God makes a difference. We're going to see what that looks like. So if you remember last week, we looked at Bethel, Gilgal, and Beersheba. And Amos is talking to them, don't go to Bethel. Don't go to Gilgal. Don't go to Beersheba. Now, Bethel, if you remember, we're going to look at this some more here today. It meant God is here. God is in this place, and you get a new name. And Gilgal, God-given inheritance. That's where Joshua reconstituted them as the children of God, Israel, circumcision, and they ate the first fruits of the land. And Beersheba, remember there was a covenant there at Beersheba, and it was at a well, and Abimelech says, God is with you. And in Amos chapter 5, verse 4, seek me so that you may live. So I'm going to read Amos chapter 5. I'm going to read verses 5 through 13. Do not resort to Bethel. Do not come to Gilgal, nor cross over to Beersheba. For Gilgal will certainly go into captivity, and Bethel will come to nothing. Seek the Lord so that you may live, or he will break through like a fire, house of Joseph, and it will consume with no one to extinguish it for Bethel. For those who turn justice into wormwood and throw righteousness to the earth, he who made the Pleiades and Orion and changes deep darkness into morning, who also darkens day into night, who calls for the waters of the sea and pours them out on the surface of the earth, the Lord is his name. It is he who makes destruction flash upon the strong, so that destruction comes upon the fortress. They hate him who rebukes in the gate. They despise him who speaks with integrity. Therefore, because you impose heavy rent on the poor and take a tribute of grain from them, though you have built houses of cut stone, yet you will not live in them. You have planted beautiful vineyards, yet you will not drink their wine. For I know your offenses are many and your sins are great, you who are hostile to the righteous and accept bribes, turn away the poor from justice at the gate. Therefore, at such a time, the prudent person keeps quiet, because it is an evil time. Now remember, he's talking to this group we were talking about earlier who had broken off. They had followed Jeroboam. This is the northern tribes here. So he's talking to them, and through this lesson we have seen how they've lived. And right here again, their offenses are great. How they've treated the poor, all of these things. But they would make their pilgrimage to Bethel, and pilgrimage to Beersheba, pilgrimages to Gilgal every year. Very religious for them. But going back to Jacob, and if we could understand these parts, it changes everything, because we read the story in Genesis 28, Jacob, why is he here? Well, he just stole a blessing. I mean, you talk about stealing. He just stole the blessing from his brother Esau. And his mom put him up to it. I mean, think about this. I mean, your mom was like, hey, I like you better than Esau. Go in there and you get the blessing. I'm going to tell you what to do, how to dress. And then Esau's this big, rough and tough guy. See, he's on the run. I don't know if he's got any food or whatever. It seems like that time when he stole the blessing off of Esau, Esau's pretty hungry. And I'd say Jacob's pretty weary because he ain't even got a pillow. He's in the wilderness. He's got to take a rock for a pillow, and he's laying in this place, and he don't know what to do. He's left his family. His own brothers wanting to kill him. And he has a dream. And he dreams of a ladder that stretches into heaven. Now, see, we always look at that as God is showing you how to get to heaven. And he sees angels ascending and descending on the ladder. Now we know John's Gospel chapter 1, you'll see these angels ascending, descending on the Son of Man. But that ladder that was linking heaven and earth together, that we've talked about the tabernacle, that's what linked heaven and earth together. But that ladder was not to provide man a way to get to heaven. It wasn't that. So what was it? It was a ladder that brought God to Bethel. Yeah, that brought God to man. And the whole Bible wasn't about us going to where God is. The whole Bible is about God coming where we are. I mean, that's the Bible. I will dwell with them. I'll make my tabernacle. The Word became flesh and what? Dwelt among us, tabernacled among us. So the whole Bible is not about us going to heaven. It's about God coming here. And so the ladder brought God to Bethel. God is here. And Jacob, oh my God, God is in this place, and I didn't even know it. But where God comes, he makes a difference. And at Bethel, God touched Jacob's circumstances. I mean, he's in a mess, right? And just think about this. If God would have said, well, I come here to put you and burn you in hell because you stole a blessing off of Esau, or the fingernail polish off of Esau. But he didn't do that. He comes in the middle of his circumstances, and he gives him promises and hopes. And in the end, he changes Jacob himself, confirming all that was inherent in the gift of his new name, Israel. So Bethel was the place where the old life became new life, and the old man becomes the new man. And so the heart of Amos's oracle about Bethel is occupied with the hymn to the transforming God, and that hymn that they would sing. And it's hard to pick these out. I have to do a lot of scholarly research and for these things, but Hebrew people would just break out in song. They would just break out in song, and you can see that in Paul's writing. Paul has given you some doctrine, and then he breaks out in song. And if you don't know that, you'll think the song he's singing is part of the doctrine he's given, but it's not. It's a doxology. It's a celebration. He just breaks out. We looked at some of those in in Romans, Paul is going, okay, do this. Oh, but who's known the mind of the Lord? And he just goes off in these songs. Hebrew people would do that. Well, always in their pilgrimages, they would be singing. When they would come to Jerusalem, they were songs of ascent. They would be singing. So this hymn here, just 2 verses, verses 8 and 9. Let me read that again. He who made the Pleiades and Orion and changes deep darkness into morning, who also darkens day into night, and who calls for the waters of the sea and pours them out on the surface of the earth. The Lord is his name. It is he who makes destruction flash upon the strong, so that destruction comes upon the fortress. Now, they would be singing these songs, and you can imagine they're singing this song, this is what God does to our enemies, right? This is what God does. He destroys their strongholds, and he destroys them. And Amos is using their own hymn in the oracle against them. You see what I mean? Okay, you want to sing this song, but this very song you singing is happening to you. And Amos quotes to these Bethelite pilgrims one of the hymns out of their own hymn books, Where better than at Bethel to sing to the God who makes a difference? And the reference here to the Pleiades and Orion, and I love to look at the stars. I'm no astrologer in that sense, or is it astrology or astronomy? Astrologer there. Yeah, they tell fortunes. But astronomy, because you got to remember back in those days, I bought something I hadn't bought in a long time. Tracy's mom, like when we do cabbage and stuff, she'll say, well, we can't do cabbage next week. I'm like, well, we got to pick it. Well, it ain't in the head. And if it ain't in the head, then it won't keep. And they know when to dig potatoes. And I'm telling you, if you follow them signs, the taters will keep. And if you don't follow them signs, they rot. And so they went by signs in those days. And they could look in the sky. And I can look up in the skies at night, and I can watch Orion. And I watch Orion move through the sky. And I know in the wintertime when I go out in the morning, Orion will be right there. And in the summertime, Orion is right here. And, in the morning sky, it's here. And in summer sky, it's here. And the Big Dipper's right here. And so that's how they couldn't go to Walmart's and buy a calendar and look at that stuff. So what I told you I bought the other day, there's this big, never remember the name of the store, but I love the store. It's got all this pressure pots and everything for canning, just all kinds of stuff in the store. It's going down towards Hillsville. And I bought a Farmer's Almanac for $26. Oh, no. This is for canning, like pressure. It's old-timey stuff. And one of the things they got in there, they've got all this candy, and you can get a bag and just put all this candy in your bag, and you weigh the bag and like that. And I was like, oh, Dad, them bit of honeys. You like them bit of honeys, don't you? Well, you didn't get any because Tracy got them all. I was like, Dad likes this. And so I put them all in the bag, and then you go weigh them, but there's cow tails and, just all them kinds of candy in there. What's that? No, I don't remember that. Oh, yeah. But they have but I bought a Farmer's Almanac. So anyway, when he makes reference to this Pleiades and Orion, he's talking about what would mark off the changes of the season. And they're saying God is the one who brings about the changes of the seasons. and then who darkens day into night. He also makes the daily changes. Deep darkness becomes morning, and then the day turns into night. It's God who does that. We just think, it's God who does these things. And then he makes the occasional changes when he talks about the sea wall is breached, who caused the waters of the sea, pours them out on the surface of the earth. He says God does this. And the historical changes when the strong and the fortress fall before the destroyer. But this hymn is bracketed about with a reference to a people who resist change, the thing that we were talking about earlier before we came on. And, that's the thing that you're never going to have all this figured out. You're always going to be challenged with, as soon as you get it, it's like, okay, now it's something else. And there's more wrestling. And just when you think you got Galatians figured out, here's a verse that, oh my gosh, I got another 5 years of learning here. So, but these people were resisting the change. They come and they go from Bethel, but nothing ever happened. This is why now we're seated in a circle, because we want the gospel, we want things to affect us, to make a change, always. And if anybody says, well, I've been going to church for 50 years, it doesn't matter. We all need adjustment. We all do. We all do. So those verses right here, verses 10 through 12, they're singing this hymn. They're going to Bethel. They're singing it about their enemies, and they got it going on. Now listen, right after singing that hymn, look what he says. They hate him who rebukes in the gate, and they despise him who speaks with integrity. Therefore, because you impose heavy rent on the poor and take a tribute of grain from them, though you have built houses of cut stone, you got strong houses over here, yet you won't live in them. You've planted beautiful vineyards. You won't drink the wine from them. I know your offenses are many, your sins are great. You who are hostile to the righteous and accept bribes and turn away the poor from justice at the gate. You got to understand, the poor would come to the gate. The gate was where the elders would always meet. They would come there to seek justice or bring their grievances or whatever they had. That's where they would come. This goes all the way back to Ruth. That's when they would spit in the face and take the shoe off and do those things. So the gate is very, very, very important here. Straight is the gate. This is why Jesus would make reference to these words there, where the elders are. So they would go to Bethel and they would sing these hymns, but they would come totally unchanged. They hated, they didn't want righteousness. They didn't want it. So the failure wasn't in the Bethel promises, right? Nor in the God of Bethel, but in their stubbornness to change. And Amos exposes a religion which leaves life untouched. They go and they sing, they got their hymns and their lovey-dovey, and they got the great music programs, and they come away and nothing has changed. Isn't that the American church? Justice is still turned to wormwood. Wormwood here means sour. In other words, they don't want anything to do with justice. It's too sour. We don't want it. We got some good music. We got groups coming. We got the lights down. We got the smoke machines. We got it all going on. Righteousness is still overthrown, thrown to the earth. Justice is turned sour. And then it only lets you think here, you only imagine maybe what might have been. Because honestly, you remember Jacob met God at Bethel. His whole life changed. And a new life is primary evidence for having had credible dealings with God. I mean, I know, so to me it doesn't matter, because when I hear people tell me, well, I've been going to church 50 years, because honestly, that's not the report you'll give. I mean, Paul didn't say, hey, I've been a Jew my whole life. He said, I was on the road to Damascus, and a great light overshadowed me. Because you're going to tell your experience when God met you where you was. Because from that moment on, your life took a detour. The road you was on just got demolished, and a whole new path got set out before you. Those are the things I want to hear. Where there is no change, then we are saying that God makes no difference. Right? And that's not true. The first mark of a transformed person, by contrast, with verse 10, is that he loves the voice of God's law. See, these are other verses. I look at Paul being a Jew, Paul being a Hebrew, know the Psalms, and I delight in the law of the Lord. I mean, it's all through, and I will sing, I will meditate on God's law day and night. And then you get in Galatians, and it's like Paul says, oh no, let's throw all that out. No, something. So a person who really has had an encounter with God loves God's word. Can't help it. You can't help it. But these people returned from Bethel to their old resentment of the voice of justice in the gate. They come back to the gate and they don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear it. We just want to sing our songs. Pretend that we met God. They were pretending that God was in that place. They were pretending. You know, a lot of people come away from church and God really showed up today because they had an emotional thing. But their life is still the same. And they didn't want a judge who pronounced a correct verdict, or a witness who tells the fact as they happen, who speaks truth. The point was their refusal to allow life to be governed by truth. Now I got to flip over here a minute. They didn't want a life to be governed by truth. And it takes something to speak truth to power. Now, this is a little bit of a read here, and I thought, well, I'm going to cut this short, but I'm just going to read it. Okay? Ephesians chapter 4, verse 14. As a result, we are no longer children tossed here and there by waves, carried away about every wind of doctrine, by the trickery of people, by craftiness in deceitful scheming, but speaking the truth in love. Here's that word again, truth in love. We are to grow up in all aspects unto him who is the head, that is Christ, from whom the whole body, being fitted and held together by what every joint supplies. This is another reason we're here. Every joint supplies, according to the proper working of each individual part, causes the growth of the body for the building up of itself in love. Now again, speaking truth in love, that's something that we've left out in the church today. We were talking the other day, and I don't know who it was. I can't remember who I was talking to. But, you know, doctors used to tell you when you would come in, and they would say, well, my God, you're overweight. Has the doctor ever told you need to lose some weight? They don't tell you that anymore because they don't want to lose your business. So we got to keep you as a good customer. Because doctors would tell you, well, you're eating wrong. You do this, you do this. Now it's like, oh, well, it's good to see you. Oh, everything's good. Take this pill. And a church has kind of gotten that way, right? Speaking truth in love. Now, let me keep on reading here. So I say this. This is Paul writing. And affirm in the Lord. Paul is saying, I say this and affirm in the Lord that you are to no longer walk as the Gentiles walk in the futility of their mind. So he's looking at the people and he's saying, guys, that's not who you are anymore. Don't do that. In the futility, in the emptiness of their mind, in the vanity of their mind, being darkened in their understanding, excluded from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them. Now, what is Amos telling the people here? You're going there thinking you have the life of God, but you've excluded yourself because of your stubbornness. So Paul is, as Amos to these people, he's warning these people, don't do that because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the hardness of their heart. And they have become callous, having given themselves up to indecent behavior for the practice of every kind of impurity with greediness. Now remember what these people do, charging a lot of rent and, got all of this stuff going on. Greediness. I mean, it's like Paul is telling them right out of the book of Amos. But you did not learn Christ in this way. If indeed you have heard him and have been taught in him, just as truth is in Jesus, that in reference to your former way of life, you are to rid yourselves of the old self, which is being corrupted in accordance with the lust of deceit, and that you are to be renewed in the spirit of your minds, and to put on the new self, which is in the likeness of God, has been created in righteousness and holiness of truth. One more verse. Therefore, so he's telling them what they are to do, aren't they? He's giving them instructions. Now remember, they're going to Bethel. They would know the story of Bethel. What happened at Bethel? When Jacob leaves Padan Aram and comes back to Bethel, God shows up again in the night visions. And now God says, you're not Jacob anymore, you're Israel. Therefore, ridding yourselves of falsehood, speak truth, each one of you with his neighbor, because we are parts of one another. I mean, what a statement. Now, these guys in Amos can't stand truth. Why? Because of their stubbornness. Why? Because of their greediness. So the God of Bethel was not just a vision to be admired. He was a God who speaks. He wasn't like the other gods who are dumb. This is a God who actually speaks to them. And you can go read this in all through the scriptures, especially Genesis 35. He talks to them. I believe he still does. I know he does. But yet they came away from Bethel as those who heard nothing. Nothing. Nobody came away singing, oh, how I love thy law. That's Psalm 119. So the second evidence of transformation, we deduce from verse 11 here, is the evidence of how they treat other people. The relationship to other people, especially the poor. And for them, the poor was people to be taken advantage of. The poor were just, hey, we can charge them a whole lot of rent and we can just keep them in their place and we can just, hey, they're just lazy bums anyway. They're made to be taken advantage of. And then in verse 12, they were people who accept bribes. There was nothing fair there. Kind of, it's almost like, hey, if you got a lot of money, doesn't matter what you do, you can get the lawyers. And I mean, if OJ can get away with it, anybody can if you got enough money. They left Bethel bearing about abundant rebellions on their consciousness, but they were unconcerned about it. You know, at least what you were talking about earlier, it burns your conscience. But remember, Paul warns those people who become callous. In other words, it doesn't, hey, we went to Bethel. We went to church on Sunday. Hey, we did our bit. We got our mark. What's that? Their conscience were sealed. They'd become callous. And I want to say something here, and I know this to be true, but my words will be inadequate how I describe that. But once you know, I go back to this reference a lot. Here is Peter, and Peter's working with his nets, and Jesus comes, hey, can I borrow your boat? Yeah, go ahead. Peter's working it, and Jesus gives this great sermon, And then he says, shove out a little bit. Let's shove out. And throw your nets on the right side. And, they get such a haul in there. And then Peter realizes who's in his boat. And Peter falls back and he says, depart from me, I'm a sinner. And I can tell you, every time you have an encounter with the Lord, that's your response. I don't care who you are. That's your response. John, the great apostle, fell on his face as a dead man. That's the response. But then at the same time, again, I struggle with words. I tell you what I wrote down. There can obviously be no assurance of sins forgiven when there's no concern about sin. Right? So if you're not really concerned about it, then how are you ever going to get the assurance? But once you realize you are a sinner, then Christ there, he brings the assurance. I can remember where I was when that assurance came to me. I was on the road from Charlotte to Columbia, driving down to Columbia. It's 90 miles, and I can tell you these stories, but that's mine. Maybe you know where God came and gave you the assurance. You have been forgiven. A lot of people don't know that. You can quote verses, but see, when God comes in the vehicle with you and all this other stuff, there's great assurance there. The person who has done business with God from that moment onwards, you're concerned to have God's approval. Do you not think that? How would God approve of? Have you ever been watching TV and then this comes on and you're like, I know God wouldn't want me to watch this. Because now you're concerned, not that I'm going to go to hell, but I want God's approval. It's just like a son wants his dad's approval, or a daughter wants his dad or mom's approval. You want God's approval. And that's a good place to be. It really is. It doesn't, grace. No, it's there and you have that, but still in relationship-wise, husbands want the approval of their wives want the approval of their husbands, sons, you want that approval. It's part of relationship. And then out of that, you want to love what he loves and to hate what he hates. Right? And then we see this in verse 12. I won't read it, but remember when Jacob, he's isolated in the wilderness. Did God not help Jacob? He could have just said, well, you just stole something. I'm not helping you. But God, Jacob, the helpless Jacob, wanders into the house of God. He strays in there accidentally. And what does God do? God takes him in. He didn't know he was going into God's house. What's Bethel mean? House of God. Jacob thought he was in the wilderness. He's in God's house. And God took care of him, and God gave him help, and God changed his name, and God gave him hope, and God gave him promises. What are we to do when helpless people stray in? Should we not do? But what did they do? They accepted bribes. They turned away the poor. So Bethel was nothing to them. But these people here, they set themselves in opposition to the man that is in the right. You've got the money, they'll listen. If you don't have the money, sorry about your luck, right? That was their justice. And look at verse 13. Therefore, at such a time, the prudent person keeps quiet because it's an evil time. Amos implies had they been effectively in the presence of the God of Bethel, they would have sought to achieve a social order favorable to righteousness. If they had really been in God's presence, these things would have bothered them. But instead, the social climate of the day threatened anyone who voiced an opinion contrary to its unrighteous and self-seeking, greedy character or culture of the day. Right? You can't say nothing about that. And the prudent here, what that means is if you're trying to succeed in this society, you better keep your mouth shut. Right? If you're trying to succeed, don't go against the grain here, because as soon as you do, you're out. And that's what he says. Therefore, at such a time, the prudent person, those trying, they're just going to keep quiet. Can't say it. I mean, you think I'm reading out of the Old Testament. I'm reading modern theology here, ain't it? It was a society which encouraged wrongdoing and discouraged standing for principle. Now, when grace transforms a person, it brings this aspect of life into focus, a determination to create a society in which righteousness dwells. That's what I always wonder with people. They aren't concerned with society. And I mean, you and I can't affect things in Charlotte and Atlanta, but we sure can here. But nobody's concerned about it because we live in our little sealed houses. The Bethel pilgrimage was a bank holiday outing devoid of serious religious or spiritual intent. It wasn't serious. They were just going. It was playing with God. Again, I go back to Galatians. Be not deceived. God is not mocked. I mean, how do you take that statement? They were just playing with God. I mean, really, when people come to church on Sunday, are they coming to Bethel? Are they coming there to encounter God? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. Do I want to be changed? Do I really not? And I mean, really, I'm pretty comfortable with where I am. And according to Amos, they come under the double peril of fire and frustration. And fire stands for the ultimate display of divine rejection of this non-serious way of life. They wasn't serious about their way of life. They wasn't serious about it. Seek the Lord, verse 6. Seek the Lord so that you may live, or he will break through like a fire. See, they wasn't serious. Now, this verse sets out two sides of a situation. The reality of the wrath of God against a religion devoid of renewal. In other words, it was just a play group, but not a church. You know, a church, to me, honestly, it ought to be challenging. It really should. Challenging. And the second part, the total incapacity of such a religion to offer any soothing or calming in the day when God acts. In other words, not addressing the problem. Okay, because a lot of people can come and they go and they live in a little bubble, but what happens when catastrophe hits? What happens when the walls come crashing down? And we all know we've been there. You know, and you know, modern religion is like going to the doctor, take a pill. And the pill doesn't, what does the pill do? It doesn't solve the problem. It just soothes the pain for a little while. You know, I know this is, let me go read a couple verses out of Matthew 7. Verse 21. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven will enter. Many will say to me on that day, boy, there's something for you to go look up. What day is Jesus referring to? On that day. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name cast out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? Then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Leave me, you who practice lawlessness. To me, on that day is resurrection. Because Jesus was telling them, the kingdom's at hand, the kingdom's at hand, the kingdom's at hand, the kingdom's at hand. And then on resurrection, boom, here it is, full force, on the scene. Right? So on that day, you're cut off. And they were. Same thing happens in the book of Amos here. It's hard for us to imagine that the God of grace cuts people off, but they were cut off, and then Jesus is even telling them they're going to be cut off, and guess what? They were cut off, and people today are still cut off. And going back in verse 11, you've built houses, but you won't live in them. You planted vineyards, you won't drink of the fruit. What he's saying here is not they're going to be to somebody else, but he's saying your labors will never bring you satisfaction. You're never going to be satisfied. You're going to work your fingers to the bone, and what do you get? Bony fingers. You're never going to be satisfied. This is the frustration, non-productiveness of a life apart from God. And there's 5 points, I'm going to be done here in a minute, which true religion manifests its reality in the life of a person. Number 1 is the love of God's truth. The love of God's truth. Number 2, submission within the fellowship. Not trying to climb Jacob's ladder, so to speak. Number 3, concern for God's approval. And number 4, moral integrity. And number 5, social order. You're concerned. Now, these are not 5 rungs of a ladder up to heaven or 5 good works meriting God's approval. They are 5 parallel evidences that a person has met the God of Bethel at the bottom of the ladder, whether God has come to reveal himself, to speak, and to bless. True religion is not a way to God, but a way from God. It speaks out of a union and out of communion with God. True religion. Therefore, the great opening call from Amos is this. Verse 6, seek the Lord so that you may live. Make him your place of pilgrimage. In other words, Amos is saying you have set aside time to go to Bethel. Set aside time for God. You know, you had to organize your life to be able to make the pilgrimage. I wish people would do that to this day, because I know you guys plan, okay, I'm going to church on Wednesday evening, planning my life. I wish other people would say, hey, I'm going to Bethel on Wednesday to meet with God, so I'm going to move this to Tuesday, I'm going to move this to Thursday, I'm going to do this early, I'm going to get this. And you have done all of that, but just don't go to Bethel. Go there to meet God. Go there to encounter him. I mean, you've had to get somebody to watch the dogs and get the mail, and, you know, you went on this pilgrimage. You had to shop around for a motel. You did all of this planning, so why not organize your life around God? Wouldn't that be something? Not, oh, well, everything is right, I think I'll go. As soon as everything gets in order and falls into place. No, organize your life. Remember what we read in Ephesians. Your pilgrimage has involved, Amos is talking to the people. Your pilgrimage has involved you in prayer and praise, singing, hearing God's word. Now he says, maintain these things, but focus them on Him. So Amos says, don't seek Bethel, seek the Lord. For this is the way of life. Seek the Lord and live. Now the word live there, it's a command. It's a command in that we must deliberately set ourselves to live in this way. Again, go read what Paul said in Ephesians. We read all of that. He's telling you, put off that old man, put on the new man, put on Christ, speak truth in love. Don't be like them others do. So that's a deliberate thing that we have to do. But it's also a promise. So it's a command and a promise at the same time, because God is telling us, in this way you will truly have life and life more abundantly. If you do this, you will have life and life more. I'm commanding you to do it, but it's also a promise. So the God of Bethel says, live, because it belongs to His nature to transform us by His own patience and power, the lives of those who have been brought into communion with Him. Seek the Lord so that you may live. And we will probably finish up chapter 5 next week. And I will quit with that.